Welcome to Consciousness, the DSR Network podcast focusing on the artificial intelligence revolution, politics, and policy.
This podcast is underwritten in part by the U.S. Embassy of the United Arab Emirates. Its editorial content is completely independent, and the views expressed are exclusively those of participating experts. It is presented live, without editing. For further information about the UAE's efforts in the areas of artificial intelligence and technology, go to the website of the embassy at www.uae-embassy.org and search for UAE-US Tech Cooperation. We thank them for their support. We thank everybody who's supporting this podcast for their support, and we look forward to it developing and growing over time because the issue is so important. Hello and welcome to Consciousness. I'm David Rothkopf, your host. Each week we talk about different issues that pertain to the revolution in artificial intelligence and related next-gen technologies. This week we're extremely happy to have with us Camille Stewart Gloster. She's the former Deputy National Cyber Director for Technology and Ecosystem Security at the White House. She's the current CEO and principal of CAS Strategies. Hi, Camille. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, David.
I think the place to start, just because it seems kind of fresh, is that you your organization put together an event with Diplomatic Courier called the 2024 Global Action Forum, which sounds like it dealt with a lot of the issues we deal with here every day. It even had some speakers who we've had here on our podcast.
Yeah.
My thought was perhaps you could tell us what the objective was with that event, and then we can pick up on some of the themes.
Yes. So the event was focused on informing the French AI Summit. The Bletchley Summit, the Seoul Summit on AI were both focused on safety. And so the attendees were US, UK, countries that are well poised to have safety conversations, especially ones focused on foundational models and the evolution of AI. And this conversation was really geared at bringing the global majority or more of the global majority into the conversation. The French AI Action Summit broadens the aperture on the conversation beyond security to include innovation and public interest AI and talent and a number of other topics that welcome more countries into the dialogue about global AI governance. And so the forum was designed to help inform the French on what deliverables, what commitments, what actions could be taken that support global majority countries to participate more fulsomely and to make sure that the things that they are building as part of the summit actually cater to a broader swath of the global demographics. The UN report that came out a few weeks ago around UNGA talks about how 118 countries that participate in the UN are not participating in many of the other main venues for global AI governance collaboration. That's a real problem. And so to truly be global, to learn from the mistakes and lessons that we've had in the advent of the internet and the evolution of social media, we've got to make sure that our governance apparatus, our innovations, our building out of innovation ecosystems are truly global.
Yeah, and this is something we've talked about actually a lot here recently. We've had one of the authors of the global, the UN document, used to be a former colleague of yours from the White House. Yeah. And we also, one of your speakers, Janasa, was at the event, who was on our podcast a week or two ago.
Yeah.
So we've been focused on these issues. I guess the point, this is an AI podcast. We talk a lot about AI, and I think I followed that UK safety event and so forth. And I'm glad it took place, just like
Yes.
I'm glad the White House did an executive order on AI. But they all are in a very kind of inchoate state, right? They're very preliminary. It's kind of like, this is important. We really ought to talk about it. You know, the White House document was kind of, this kind of pre-roadmap. Everybody should have a roadmap. Go do a roadmap, right? And the UK event talked a lot about frontier AI,
Yes.
which is a term meaning things that will happen in the future and we don't know what they are. So we, it's encouraging, I guess that the French one is broadening its ban, because AI in the global South, for example, is a big issue, very specific, has very specific issues. What were the specific takeaways from your conversation that you hope will be addressed that will help move this next sort of high level global conversation forward?
Yeah. I mean, the conversation really focused on the unique risks, harms, and opportunities that come from global majority countries and their engagement in the use of AI. And that these conversations that center just on safety or just on frontier models don't are not attuned to those concerns. And so in thinking about how global majority countries come to the table, they expressed a lot of desire to make sure that it is serving their people, that they are reaping the benefits of using AI and investing resources in changing their markets or the way they're structured, that kind of thing. But also self-sufficiency. That was the underlying point of most of the conversation. So the discussion was centered on the intersection of policy and practice. So not just talking about global governance in theory, but really as we think about, the UN proposed the fund, we've heard about infrastructure and in-kind support that's been given. But as we think about what an AI investment infrastructure that's shared and supports global development of AI innovation ecosystems around the world, whether that's regionally or in countries, there's going to be a lot of work that's necessary there. And in thinking about that, our conversation really focused on getting to a point of self-sufficiency. Countries do not want to have to rely on partner countries in perpetuity. They don't want investments that aren't actionable and don't align. And they want to be able to create sustained markets and investments that are going to be strong in their own accord. And so the conversation really leaned towards, how do we move towards self-sufficiency? How do we make sure that this isn't a modern day extraction of all of the resources and data inherent in these countries, and then they look up and have lost access to models, or have otherwise been disenfranchised by their engagement. And so they want to figure out, what is their role in this AI evolution. Some countries are innovating, some countries are regulating, some countries are scaling, and what are global majority countries going to do to contribute to this ecosystem?
Yeah, or even be invited to discuss it.
Yes.
I mean, most of the conversations that are taking place don't involve them. Some of them have stepped up. The president of Brazil made a very impassioned speech in which he said, look, we want a place at the table. And I think a lot of the people I talk to from that part of the world feel there's a pretty good chance that either A, development is going to be exclusionary, or B, the countries that are in the lead here are going to sort of rocket ahead because they've got the resources and so forth, and everybody else is going to be left behind. So that, to me, there are two big baskets. I mean, there are a lot of baskets, but there are two baskets here that I think are interesting to talk about. One is when you call global majority countries, we can call it the global South. It's the people who it's not the US, China, and Europe, basically, right, and Japan, right? It's everybody else. And, for them, their issues are, how do we avoid digital colonialism? How do we avoid, somebody has used the term data slavery, how do we avoid that? And that starts with data sovereignty. Like, how do we control our cloud? And how do we deal with the resource issues? Not just infrastructure, but energy, because it's energy intensive, or manpower. How do we regulate? How do we influence global regulations? How do we influence global trade policies? Because, the U.S., for example, right now is in a kind of restriction-oriented mentality with regard to these technologies, right? Which, in my view, is probably not in the interest of the U.S. because these technologies are being developed everywhere else, and if we think we can keep them from people, but I'm not so sure about that. But that's one basket. Then there's the other basket, which I'll get to in a second, which is kind of everybody's concern: safety, privacy, algorithmic discrimination, and so on and so forth. But let's deal with the global south, and then we'll come to those. In those issues, specifically, what do you think can be done to remedy the current situation?
Yeah. We had a participant say that, are we treating data like air or data like oil? And
I've heard people complain that the U.S. is treating data like plutonium.
Oh,
treating particularly AI chips like plutonium.
Yeah, right. And there's an inconsistency there that creates an inequity. And quite frankly, one, we need to have more meaningful engagements that actually center and incorporate the unique risks, harms, and opportunities in global majority countries, rather than focusing on West-centered perspectives on where we are and where we need to go. If that conversation was more inclusive, we would make a lot more progress. And that might mean educating or informing or collaborating with countries from the global majority to make sure that they can be a part of that conversation, but doing that work, not having so many conversations that are siloed. There is always going to be bilateral engagement and, conversations centered on like-minded organizations. But how do we make sure that those are networked in a way that they feed back into the whole and are matrixed and inform the center of power on determining global governance of AI? And really what we probably need in this circumstance, and this came up quite a bit in our conversation, was more of an ICANN-like body that is multi-stakeholder, decentralized, and allows for not only governments, but civil society and industry to weigh in a way that is a little bit more balanced. Now, people will have their complaints about ICANN in terms of how quickly it moves or, its structuring. And so there's no perfect body, but that truly multi-stakeholder model is what we need in governance of AI. Also, thinking about the investments that are being made and the support that's being provided needs to be a little bit more thoughtful. If you get compute credits, but you have to use all the compute credits to train, and then by the time you're done training, all your compute credits are gone, was that an actionable investment that will help build a sustainable use of artificial intelligence? Probably not, right? So how are we thinking about making sure that the in-kind support, the investments move towards a country being self-sustaining, or at least it being actionable so that there is some longevity to the support that was provided? So there's some work to do to make sure that there's a thoughtfulness in the thread of support that's being given, that we build a shared infrastructure that is beyond just money, and that we really think about where we are doing our global governance and how we are doing it, and making sure that it is equitable such that global majority countries can meaningfully participate. Because not having a model and not having money should not be the limitations for you not to be able to show up at a convening. And one of the things that I thought was remarkable in the worst ways is that not one Caribbean country was at either the Bletchley or the Seoul Summit. And not even just that they didn't show, but most of them I spoke to did not even know it happened. And I'm talking about people who led the drafting of like the Caribbean artificial intelligence roadmap and like are driving this work. And so, I mean, we have to be thinking more holistically. And maybe each individual country across the Caribbean is not going to be at the forefront of AI innovation, but as a region, there's a richness there that can bear a lot of fruit in this innovation ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think there is the absence of doing all of that will exacerbate inequality, which will exacerbate tension, which will make conflict and unrest more likely, and therefore it's in the interest of all countries to address these issues. And Dawn's, this is just off the top of my head, but I'm a national security specialist, but long ago, I was a senior official in the Commerce Department, and before that, I was doing some economic stuff with development banks, and development banks are terribly ill-suited to doing this work. Mm-hmm. They just don't have enough people. They don't have the manpower. They don't know what's going on, and it strikes me that you say they need more than money.
Yes.
But when I talk to them, they say, but money also.
But money also. Right? Money's under everything.
Right. And I could see almost the necessity for kind of a world technology bank, some kind of multilateral entity that said digital infrastructure, digital training, it's almost a direct carryover from old development models, but there's a digital corollary, and we've got the money. So if you do X, Y, and Z, we will be able to support it. So that there's a missing piece, just like there's a missing piece regulatory, like the ICANN piece or the WTO piece. There is a missing tech development piece.
Yes, I agree. And I think there's a real opportunity to also intertwine some of the environmental aspects too, right? However you build that out, we need to be thinking about how we are identifying these opportunities, because the environmental impacts are significant. And what's happening right now is countries are like, well, maybe I need to get a data center, but is a data center near the equator really the right investment for you to make? So there's also some work to be done. And I think there's a support mechanism that needs to happen for any of these things to be actionable, in thinking about where on the AI spectrum a country wants to sit. Are you a developer? Are you a deployer? And everything in between? Are you investing in hardware and software? What do you want your AI innovation ecosystem? What do you want to be the center of your AI innovation ecosystem? And then that allows you to think about what are the AI enablers that you need to invest in, and what support do you need that can be more targeted? Because I think that dialogue as well would help governance conversations be more actionable, and any kind of development aid support that happens be more actionable. Because then is money what you need? Do you need compute credits? Do you need training? I mean, you probably need all of these things, but to what extent and how do you prioritize them? So there's some work to be done to help countries really be able to articulate in a crisp way what they want their investment to be in terms of that AI spectrum.
Okay. So, I mean, these are important issues, and I hope we'll get you back to talk about them more. I find them fascinating and underdeveloped and really urgent issues. Yes. Okay. But it's 6 days before the election here. Yeah. You worked in the administration. You worked in the government in multiple places. As you were talking, I was thinking, well, a Harris administration would probably care about what you're saying, but a Trump administration, not so much. And that's got a global consequence, right? Yes. But we're about to enter, I'm hoping, a next generation administration that is tackling next generation issues. And whereas the administrations you've been in have dealt with AI in a kind of, just getting up on our hind legs kind of way, just like, let's get up to, let's acknowledge it's a thing. Mm-hmm. It's still pretty preliminary, right? The average response in cabinet level departments to the executive order was, okay, we'll get a guy for that.
Yeah.
And we'll have an office. They'll do AI, right? Just
Well,
like they had a CTO, right?
Yes.
Right. And they're not going to deal with the fact that, AI changes the way education is done profoundly, because some of it can be, or AI changes what, the labor department's going to be dealing with,
Yes.
or DOD or whatever, right? So, but we're not there. But the next administration is going to be the first administration that has to deal with the horizontal reality of transformational change. And setting aside for the fact, there are probably not enough people who understand all of this stuff. There is this first 100 days issue, like, what are the policy priorities? That, if you were sitting opposite, God willing, President-elect Kamala Harris, what would you say? Because she's been deeply involved in these issues. She's a sort of kind of a product of Silicon Valley. She's worked there for 30 years in the administration. She's been deeply involved. She gets it. What would you say she should focus on?
Yeah. I mean, doubling down on some of the things that are in the EO, like the AI tech talent pipeline, expanding that to support education investments across the country, not just the pipeline to federal government, would be my first recommendation for her. Next would be focusing on supporting Congress as they move towards some kind of comprehensive legislation, data privacy, something focused on AI. But the big thing would be a mandate that leverages existing frameworks and gets them the support that they need, and existing regulatory bodies to take on AI as it manifests. I think there's a real desire to not recreate the wheel, which will create, confusion and disruptions and how companies operate and how the technology is deployed. And I think affirming the fact that departments and agencies, especially with any regulatory authority or support authority, should incorporate AI governance as part of their existing legal framework, and where there are questions, identifying those places so that there can be some work to be done to bridge the gap, and understanding where we might need new legislation or gap filling. But I think that push to make sure that every new technology isn't viewed as a need for a new agency that is now going to regulate AI, or a new piece of legislation that might be duplicative or conflict with some of the existing structures and frameworks, I think will be really important. And those are the things that I would have her focus on, making sure that our people are ready at all levels, having the education and training support to be able to get the right people in the seats in the federal space, but also in the private sector, and then addressing that legal and regulatory challenge, because there is a confusion already happening with whether or not existing frameworks are able to support AI regulation.
Or for that matter, AI innovation.
Exactly.
Because, CHIPS and Science Act was a big deal.
Yeah.
Building the chip making infrastructure here is important. And we've been the leader in AI related chips. But, we're sort of entering the period where, every senior official in local, state, or federal government's like, oh, yeah, I want some of that AI.
Yes.
Like, give me some of that AI. And it's like, well, maybe we should refine what you're asking for here.
Right.
A little bit, right? Do you have the infrastructure? Do you have the human resources? Do you have the energy resources? Do you know how AI can help you spend money more efficiently? You were talking earlier about energy. The flip side is, and we're actually about to launch a completely separate podcast here on energy and climate.
Oh, nice.
And AI. And the flip side is that AI can help you mitigate climate problems.
Yes.
And do those kind of things. And so, people have to be informed as to what's on the menu. And the menu is in, it's in Sanskrit. Somebody's going to translate the menu for them.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. There's a real knowledge gap. And then what's also concerning is not only the opportunity to leverage it to advance desired ends, but the inclination to regulate without that understanding. And so there's a moment that we are in where we can have the federal government lean in, set a trajectory that is beyond this get the house in order. I think that was necessary. When we wrote the AIEO, it was really about let's make sure we understand what work is being done, can be done in the federal government, invest heavily in research and development. Those things are really important. But now we need to lean into setting a real trajectory to outlining how thinking about AI innovation and regulation fits into existing infrastructures, and then doing some gap identification, as well as partnering with our partners across the world to bring them along, because there are no borders on this. And so their lack of investment or being or feeling left behind has real implications for us, even in just the security. To your point about being a national security expert, me as well. When I think about this, when we leave behind our global partners, we have no true view of the threat landscape or the opportunity landscape. How am I supposed to mitigate for that if I don't truly understand how technology is showing up in the lives of people? And AI, the innovation rate is so great, and the uses that are happening in global majority countries, and the opportunity to think about how that technology can scale positive things and negative things. But we're missing pieces of the puzzle when we are not engaging the full breadth of the population.
Well, and also, we can take a kind of, and we'll have to have another conversation because we're out of your time. But you have to take a view that goes beyond zero sum.
Yes.
That it's the U.S. or China, and so if we say, well, we're not going to sell NVIDIA chips to a country that might be also talking to China, Huawei is.
Yes.
Or if we say we're not going to allow a country that might also be talking to China to invest here, then they'll invest someplace else.
Exactly. It cannot be zero sum. And the realities of the investments already made in the infrastructure in global majority countries mean that choice has already been made if you drive it down to that. So there's a lot of changing of our perspective if that is what we're thinking, that needs to be done for this to be a realist.
Yeah, absolutely right. But AI is not a 5-axis machine tool that can be regulated like we used to do that, right? Anyway, I really enjoyed talking to you, Camille. I really hope you'll come back.
Definitely.
There's so much more to talk about here. But you're just the ideal kind of guest for us here on Soul Consciousness. And so we'll invite you. But for now, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's Soul Consciousness. We're here every week. Sometimes we're here more than once every week. And we've got some surprises in store, as I hinted there. So keep following us. And thank you for your support for making Soul Consciousness one of the top AI podcasts anywhere. So until next week, thanks to all. Bye-bye.